Hello and welcome back to Bastion and Broadcasting. This is an incredibly high energy introduction. It doesn't happen very often, but I think it's good because I have something that I actually have quite a lot to talk about tonight. Because normally with a stream, it's like, it's always touch and go whether something is going to either take me, I'm going to say everything I've got to say in about half an hour, and I'll feel like I've kind of not done a full length of stream. Or it might be something where I start, I don't know, ranking all the monster manual or designing a one-page thing. And I think this could take me 3 hours. And it's tonight, I'm pretty confident that I've got something I can talk about for an hour. So it's good. I'm feeling positive. I'm getting a load of shit in the comments for being too energetic. I'm bringing it down. Okay, we're back. So tonight we are looking at an RPG. I know it's a strange choice, right? Called Errant, and people seem to respond really positively to when I've done like these RPG read-throughs. People do like it when I look through my own games, but what you really seem to like is when I look at other people who are doing them better than me. So what I'm looking at today is a game called Errant, which is a game that is not yet out. So this is a game that is designed by Ava Islam, and it was on Kickstarter a few months ago, I think. It was around Zine Quest sort of time in February. And yeah, it funded and did very well. And I kind of backed it, and then I backed it on the concept, and then I went back and looked at it afterwards, and I thought, I'm really glad that I actually backed this. But one thing at a time. This is going to be a 64-page zine. It is still available for pre-order, so you can still get it even though the Kickstarter has ended. And I will put a link in the chat at the end for where the pre-orders are. I'm disorganized and I should have put this in there. So if anyone does have the pre-order link for Errant in the chat, feel free to throw that in the chat for people. This is why I need a producer, you see, full time. So, the reason that I got excited about this, about Errant, is one phrase that was on the Kickstarter, which was rules light, procedure heavy. Which is interesting because it should be pretty obvious to anybody that's read this anybody that's read any of my games, that I do enjoy rules light games a lot. But when I was designing Electric Bastionland, I had a page of like mantras at the front of my document that I used to, whenever I'd load up the document to do some writing, I would read through these to kind of center myself. Sounds very philosophical, but to kind of remind myself. So I had things like keep the main thing the main thing. And if this isn't better than what you could just make up at the table, take it out. And then one of the things that I had in there was, and I didn't share this publicly, so this is I think the first time I've mentioned this, I had a phrase that said, less rules and setting, more procedures and guidance. Because I like the idea of rules light a lot, but then I like games that take that rules light core and put stuff on top of it without ruining the simplicity. So when I heard rules light, procedures heavy, I was interested to see what Ava had done with this and how she makes that kind of work, because it's not something I've heard too much about before. So I'm going to get to it. Like I say, the book isn't finished yet, but the entire game is available on the World Wide Web, no less. On a website. You can get the whole thing. And it's not finished yet, I should say. This is not the finished game. I believe it's still being finalized, and there's going to be additions and stuff to the final document. But you can get basically the entire game. Yeah, there's a very clear disclaimer here. Let's set expectations. This does not represent the final product and should be treated as a work in progress. But you can kind of look through it and you can see what's going on with it, and you can see what the ideas are that are in there. Full transparency, I'm very glad that Ava felt that I was worthy of being credited here as an inspiration. I'm not going to give editing feedback as we go through this, but I think it would flow better if you push David Black towards the end of this list and maybe put me where David Black is on this list. I think it would just flow better. You don't need to put me first, but second would be nice. And yeah, so there's obviously a bit of common design philosophy there with things like Into the Odd and Electric Bastionland, and the Black Hack from David Black, and Maze Rats from Ben Milton, James Young, good to see him get a credit. And it's interesting because there is a lot of common ground there, but there is a lot in here that is very different to the type of games that I make. But spoiler, this isn't a review, but I really like what I read in here. So I really like it, even though it's so different from what I would necessarily do myself. So what I'm going to do is I am going to try and do like a relatively, not a literal like word for word read through. And I'm going to look through each section of the rules, and I'm just going to point out a few things that I found really interesting. So the core of the system, as you would expect from rules light, procedure heavy, is actually dead simple. It's basically, roll a d20, try and get equal or lower to your attribute, but you also have to get above a difficulty value. So if your strength is 10 and the difficulty is 3, you need to roll higher than 3 and equal or lower than 10. And that's your check. And that's kind of almost all of the rules. It's not quite fair, but like that's the big rule there. That's kind of the simple core of the game. You've got a very simple kind of set of attributes. Opposed checks kind of work exactly as you would expect from this kind of system, and saving throws are essentially a check. And then you get into the kind of thing that I really like. So there are difficulty values, and I'm like hardline anti-difficulty values, but what I like is you've got difficulty values in there, but there's more guidance here on how to deal with difficulty and risk on a roll, on a check, I should say. So you've got position and impact, and it's kind of related a little bit to what some of the things that I've written about difficulty in Electric Bastionland, because in Electric Bastionland you kind of have to rely on kind of narrative stuff to make things feel more difficult or easier. And Ava has kind of made it a bit more structured here, and I really like it because you can look at a challenge here. So I'm going to use like the terrible example that you get in like old role-playing games, which is like trying to jump over a fence. So if you're playing the world's most boring game and you're trying to jump over a fence, then you might say that the position, which is basically what happens on a failure, you might say the position it's not so much risky, it's going to be shaky, because the worst that's going to happen is it's not so bad. But the impact, getting over there, you can set whether it's going to be strong, fair, or weak. So the fact that in my stupid jumping over a fence example, we're probably having like shaky risk and we're probably having like weak, it probably shows that it's not worth doing as a roll. But it means you can set the player's expectations. So if they are doing something that's especially risky, you can put them in this dire position. And if they're doing something that's likely to have a large impact, you can say this is going to have a strong impact, and it means something. It's like a common language. It's kind of similar to what's in Blades in the Dark, and that's one of the things that I really liked about Blades in the Dark. For me, Blades in the Dark was, rules heavy and procedure heavy. Like I like a lot of the design that's in there, but it's just not for me, I don't think, to run. It's not my style of game that I would like to run. But here it kind of looks at it from a slightly different angle, and I do really like it. I'm not thrilled about the D5. I'm gonna every positive thing I say, I'm gonna pick like a needlessly pedantic negative that has no actual bearing. D5, come on, round it up. D6. So these are our checks. Oh, sorry, these are our rules. Let's go back. So our rules are just this. We've kind of skimmed over them. And, I would kind of argue that this position and impact section is a rule, but it's not like a massively mechanical rule. It's quite kind of narrative and easy to go with. But then we go to the procedures. And this is where things get interesting, because there's been so much discussion about like OSR style play, and I'm not going to sit here and try and like define OSR style play. But I think a certain subset of what makes OSR play interesting to some people within the kind of OSR community is this kind of thing. So the idea of all those procedures that used to be in D&D, like tracking exploration turns, tracking sort of wandering encounters, reaction rolls, morale, all those weird things that kind of, with later editions, got pushed either into the background or completely pushed out of the game. Those procedures create a kind of a structure of play that admittedly can be quite clunky. And I've played games of basic D&D that have not worked very well. I'm not going to hold up basic D&D as like the perfect system. But what they do is, if you use them well, it creates a very solid structure for your game, and it sort of creates fun moments at the table, things like the reaction roll, these procedures that aren't quite rules, but they are things that impact the table. I've been reading, weirdly, it won't be weird to anyone that's been reading the blog, but I've been reading a lot of like really boring looking like professional military wargame books, because I'm working on something that's kind of, I think there's some interesting crossover there, like between the weird like hyper military wargame like exercises that people do as training. There's some weird crossover there with like role-playing games that I'm interested to explore. So I've got 2 quotes tonight that are coming from this book that I felt they kind of lit up in my head when I was reading through this game. And one of them is by Peter Perler, who is a wargame guy. And he said, "The game is in the mind of the players. The instrumentality of the game is simply a tool to get the game into the mind of the players." And I think that really resonates with me with this kind of thing, because these rules all exist to make the game happen in your head, which I know sounds ridiculous. I've been trying to think about how to phrase this properly in a proper blog post, but I'm hoping there's a nugget of something there that explains a little bit of what I'm thinking. Like a lot of these procedures, when you look at them in isolation, they might look like weird or situational, but I think they are things that make the game happen. And the other quote that I have is another, like, I don't know, some army guy said, "Amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics." And this is talking about managing a war. So this is not a perfect crossover for designing a role-playing game. But what I kind of take from that, even though there's kind of a little bit of like innate gatekeeping in the way that's phrased, I think it's easy to get hung up on like theoretical cleverness. But if you're actually running the game at the table, what you need to worry about at the table is not some very clever set of mechanics. And that's not to say there's not clever design in this game. But what you want at the table is things that are going to make the game happen, and things that are going to make the game come off the table and into the sort of shared consciousness of the players. So that's a bit muddled, but I'm hoping that's explaining why I like this idea of procedure heavy rather than rule heavy. So we've got 4 different types of turn, which is, we're getting it. When I first started reading through this, each of these procedures that I got to, I was like, oh, this is quite involved. And then like there will be another one and another one. But then I went back and read the Kickstarter page, and the whole game is kind of designed to be very modular. So I'm not saying you should just like cross out huge sections of the rules. I mean, you can do that, but you can do that with any game. So that's not exactly a feature. But I think this game, more than any other one, this is why I can't wait to have a print copy, because I think having it all laid out in front of you, these little kind of nuggets of procedure that can just kind of enter the game, do their thing, and then exit the game, they are the kind of thing that make the game work at the table, in my experience. So we've got different types of turn. I'm going to skip on a little bit because we've also got some things mentioned in here that we're going to get to later on. So we've got different types of turn represent the kind of 4 levels of a game. So, your downtime is a month. Your initiative turn is used during combat. Your exploration turn is used when you're going from room to room exploring. And your travel turn is when you're moving through the wilderness. And then for each of these, you've got a different type of, essentially, of encounter roll. Like, it's the classic overloaded encounter die, pioneered by Brendan S. But it's different for each one. And this kind of sums up some of the philosophy behind the game, I think, that your wandering encounter roll is kind of blown out into 3 different tables, and each of these things like trend and clue, they're all addressed later on. These all explode out into other little mini procedures later on. We've got the reaction roll, which, a lot has been said about the reaction rolls, but I think it really can't be underestimated. But then it's not just left at this. It's not just, here's your reaction roll. It's the same as it was 40 years ago in Holmes D&D. Instead, you've got this whole system for negotiations. And again, I want to stress this because I think this is really important. The difference between something like this, where you've got this quite big section on a kind of mechanized social interaction system. The difference between something like this and something like, Pathfinder, where you've got these long rules for everything, is this is still essentially a procedure. You can just ignore this. You don't have to use this every time the PCs talk to an NPC. This is something that you can bust out if you want to make a particular negotiation more interesting. And, it's framed that way, and I hope that I'm not misrepresenting that, Ava. I think this is definitely framed as something that you can bring out as a kind of flourish, rather than something that's going to be more stuff that you need to remember, and it's more like rules to remember. And the thing that I really liked in here, it's such a small thing, but I like that, you essentially tell the GM what you're saying to the NPC, and the GM will treat it as either banal, giving, taking, convincing, or a bribe. And a banal exchange is a simple, trivial conversation, small talk, and it requires no check. But launching into another type of exchange without first indulging in banalities is, depending on the context, likely to raise eyebrows. So it's kind of like, this is a gross simplification, but you kind of have to make small talk before you can go in and try and bribe the guard or intimidate someone. And I just love that it's like enforced small talk. That really appeals to me. And I'm not like taking the piss. I think that's genuinely cool, because it stops the players thinking about the NPC as like they're a lock and you've got to find the right key. It means that you have to talk to them, and that could spark all sorts of future things. So that's our social system. And again, this is all available, so I'm not going to sit and like lead you through the whole system. What I'm more interested in doing is like picking out some of the highlights and looking at the kind of the overall design philosophy of this. So that's our core. How do items work? We have a kind of relatively straightforward inventory system. And again, it just goes that one step further, where it's not just that it's to do with tracking initiative. You've also got items that are like potentially difficult to find if you need them in a rush. You do have the sort of traditional encumbrance. You have supply, which I quite like, because again, in Electric Bastionland, I feel like this is coming at it from a similar angle, where In Electric Bastion, I have that supply doesn't matter until it matters, basically. So for most adventures in Electric Bastion, I'm not going to be tracking ammunition. But if you are crossing the desert and you've gotten in a load of fights, then that kind of, the fiction kind of then prompts the question of, well, how much ammunition do you have? And there's a little table in Electric Bastion that you can roll on for that. And here it's kind of, it's not the same, but it's following the same kind of idea where you have this general concept of supply, which is quite a simple way of tracking your general supplies for things like ammunition, torches, things like that. And then it only really matters when you run out or when you're getting low, and that's when you start to have to think about it. Armors and weapon kind of work in a largely expected way. There is weapon breakage. And by this point of reading through it, I was getting like flashbacks. And this is a weird comparison to make, and I apologize. But the flashbacks I started to get, first of all, were to reading the D&D 3rd edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, I know that might not be great praise for certain people, but the flashback I was getting specifically was that was like the first Dungeon Master's Guide that I had. That was the one that I first read. And reading through it, I got very excited by all these kind of rules that were in there and these procedures that were in there. When I came to play that system, they turned out to be more complicated than they needed to be. But reading through this, it kind of reminds me of the feeling of that book, if not the actual reality of it. And even a little bit of the kind of like the classic kind of AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, where you've got this kind of very broad spread of topics here. There is a focus on like adventuring and dungeon crawling and things like that, but the game is covering lots of bases here, and it kind of like, it really has a richness and a depth to it that I like. I'm sure that's going to be like insulting potentially comparing it to to either of those two books for certain people. So we've got our items and then our characters. So it's very straightforward. You're going to choose from 4 ancestries, and you're going to choose from 4 archetypes, sorry. But they are essentially your classes. Now, what I like about these, and I don't know if this is where the Arnold Kemp influence comes in, because he wrote a blog post about designing like races. If you got like a race and class system in your RPG, he has a post talking about how to make the races feel different than just having like it's a class on top of a class. And the kind of idea was that he wanted it to be that the special things that you got from, say, being a dwarf were incomparable to things that you can get from having a class, and they didn't necessarily stack with a class. So if you have that all dwarves are very good at fighting with an axe, then it kind of means that most dwarves are going to lean towards being fighters. But here you have an ability for, I mean, it's kind of like archetypes of different ancestries. So you have tough people, arcane people, cunning people, and adaptable people. And they don't stack with the classes, especially. Like for the tough ancestries, once per session, when you would be reduced to 0 HP, you may choose to be reduced to 1 instead. So that does kind of fit with like being a fighter, but that's useful for every single class. It's not just that they get a bonus to their strength, so they are better at fighting. And same with the elves, like the arcane ancestries. You can perform a minor magical feat related to your ancestry. So it almost like, this is almost encouraging you away from being a wizard, because, and they're not called wizards here, but like the spellcasting classes, because it's just giving you a little extra something on top. And I like that a lot, because it means that you get more variety. You're gonna see all of these ancestries combined with all of these archetypes. Failed professions, of course, I like this idea. At the moment, this is a very sort of straightforward list, but it gives your character a little bit more, more background. And who can dislike a game that has 100 failed professions. Let's get back to the thing. We have some artwork. I'll show the artwork afterwards. Yeah, and then your archetype: violent, deviant, zealot, occult. I'm sorry, but it is essentially fighter, rogue, cleric, and wizard. But they are different and they are interesting, which we'll get to. You get the starting equipment, which, again, I like giving characters the kind of the essentials to begin with. It just gets rid of a lot of bullshit at the start where you get to the dungeon and you don't have rope. And then that's basically all of the generalities, and then we're going to look into the actual archetypes. Renown is essentially level, isn't it? And you have I read this word, and this is what made me think of the old Gary Gygax AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, because I was like, I've never seen this word in my life, and this happened several times through reading this book. Adjutant, which I'm guessing is like, I did look it up, I'm not too proud to say that, and it's like, someone who follows you around, I guess, an apprentice sort of thing. And yeah, fair play. If you're going to go in on using these ridiculous words, then go for it. So that's cool. And then, yeah, let's get on to the actual classes, because they do some interesting things. So the violent is your fighter, and they get feats, which let you do cool things. Straightforward. The deviant is the kind of the skilled character, and they get some cool skills that let them do cool things like, engineering, sleight of hand. This is the other word that I had to look up. I can't not think of the Jetsons when I see the word jetons. But yeah, jeton it's like a token. But after adjutant, when I saw you had jeton on the next page, I realized that you were doing it on purpose, so it was fine. And then the zealot is your cleric, but this is like one of the weirder ones, because you don't get a spell list. You get you can perform miracles that are kind of like a kind of free-form magic system, I guess, which we'll get to. But you also have a relic which lets you do a cool thing. So if you have a special shield, you can like impair damage that goes on your ally. If you have a cup as your relic, you can give them immunity to a certain item, and they're just, they're cool little items. And then the miracles, we'll get back to the miracles afterwards. No, we'll go to the miracles now, and then we'll come back. So you have a covenant that has 3 or 4 eminences. I really hope this game is going to have a glossary, because there's so many words which you'd think would put me off, but I can't explain it. Somehow it all works because it's consistent in its kind of richness. And I'll put up with things that would normally put me off a game if a game goes whole hog into it, and if a game knows what it's doing. And in this case, I feel like this game has admitted straight away, we're going to use some fancy words. It's like when I read something by Patrick Stewart, I'm like, I know that I'm not going to know some of these words. I know that Patrick's not writing this for me to understand it fully, like on the first read. So you know what you're getting. And I feel like we're getting the same here, but I think a glossary would be a good addition. And then the miracle is kind of based around one of your eminences that your covenant has. So it's kind of like, it's a little bit like the, what were they called? The domains of your religion. And yeah, it lets you do things like, so this is an example one, I believe. If you follow the testament of the Horned Mother, then you can kind of heal people. And it's kind of split into a number of different, like, almost like tiers for like success and what you have to do. But it can also go wrong. And if it goes wrong, instead of healing somebody, you give them a monthly painful rash unless they lie in soil. And this is where there's a lot of cool stuff, because up to this point, if I did have one complaint, and it's not a complaint, it's that I was like, I'm enjoying all this, but I need something to grip onto from like the fiction. Give me some setting stuff in there. Give me like a little bit of implied setting. And this alone, this whole like section just has loads of like setting stuff and like cool little hooks really that can happen. So that's the way that kind of, I guess, divine casting works. And then the occult class. I keep calling them classes and wizards and clerics. I'm so sorry. The occult archetype. I'm sorry. They're really cool because you can cast sorceries, which you have from your grimoires, which are your spell books, I guess. And yeah, you can read through it and then you cast a spell. But it's not quite that simple. Let me get the spell list. Here we go, sorceries. So, when you find a new grimoire, it's not as simple as opening a spellbook and reading it. Instead, you kind of have to like do a thing to unlock it. Hang on, I'm on the wrong section here. Let me get the grimoire list. Here we go. So, when you get a grimoire, so let's say we roll... Oh, the Horned Mother. Let's say we rolled number 71, which I've just pulled out of thin air. So, the grimoire, it's not just a spell book that you open up and it's there. It's a small portrait of a woman who you recognize as your mother who died in your birth. To learn the sorcery, you must give your life to another. And then the themes of the kind of spells within are birth, shame, and guilt. And then you've got these kind of weird effects that are tied to it as well. So it could be that the spell produces a child, which in all ways is the caster's own. They must love and raise it or suffer a lifetime of guilt and regret if they do not. And I didn't plan this. I picked this at random, and this is already like incredible. Or like your ghosts will come back to haunt you. So there's just lots of cool little effects like that. And let me get my... Hang on. I've somehow like lost the actual... here we go. Amateur hour here, I'm afraid. Okay, so sorceries. So yeah, that's really cool. And then the actual like... So that they're like the miscasts, but the actual spell, you get a kind of a little bit like Maze Rats, where you sort of roll a sphere and a effect, and that's your spell. So if our D50 was 29, we would have transform, and then if our D12 was 10, death, transform, death, and then you've got to work out what that spell does. But it's still tied to this grimoire, so the whole like magic system is so kind of rich. And you could... Another great thing about this game is if you're looking at this and, like me, you're thinking there's so many cool ideas in here. But if you're one of these people that just like always wants to hack together your own system, if you're not somebody that generally runs things by the book, if you're trying to work on your own kind of homebrew thing, there's so many things here that you could just pluck out and use. And again, that's encouraged by Ava. It was on the Kickstarter, so I'm within my remit to say that. That Ava said these ideas can be stolen, essentially. So, buy the book and just like mine it for ideas, because there's so much cool stuff in here. So that's the magic system. We have a traveling system for going over wilderness, which is relatively straightforward. Another thing which I liked is marching order is something that's like, it's like an unspoken rule in certain forms of D&D, but in lots of versions of it, it's either tucked away as a mention, or it's just something that gets forgotten about. Whereas here, it's kind of cool that you have like a marching order procedure. And in fact, this isn't even the marching order one that I was thinking of. because there is a marching order procedure for travel across the wilderness, and then there's a separate one for in the dungeon. Let me see if I can find it. I think it's on a different section. But yeah, there's a separate one. So it's that same thing where like things, it's like a fractal kind of thing. You can go as deep as you want to go with it. I hadn't noticed that there was a procedure for eating monsters. So eating magic monsters has side effects. The errant makes a saving throw. If they are successful, they gain a one-time use of the monster's ability, e.g. a dragon's breath attack. And it's lots of little things like this that feel like they feel like little gems that you would normally see in a blog post. So it's going to be really cool to have them all together in in one thing. One like 64-page zine. Yeah, I can't read about weather systems and not laugh because I keep talking about that. I have it back there somewhere. The AD&D Wilderness Survival Guide that has rules for different sizes of hailstone and how much damage the hailstones do, and you can just die to hail if you're not careful. And it just always reminds me of that. I'm sure that's not a part of this system. Exploration. So this is where I've seen the marching order thing again. So the marching order in the dungeon is handled with a different procedure to the marching order in the wilderness. And you've got scout for the person that's sneaking ahead. You've got the vanguard for people at the front. You've got the main section who are in the middle and the rear guard who are at the back. And there's not fancy rules here. There's nothing saying like, oh, well, if you're in the main guard, you get +1 to your morale. No, it's just saying like, here's a procedure. Think about it. And then we've got your usual like doors, lockpicking, stealth, traps. I haven't read the trap system actually. Let's see. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Traps. Harvesting components from flora and fauna. So that's cool that you've got a little procedure in there for that. So that's your exploring. Initiative is based on, or kind of like draws on light, I believe. Yeah, it mentions light. So if you're illuminated, it affects the way that your initiative works. So that's like a cool little nod to, almost like Veins of the Earth has a kind of initiative as light system. Okay, and then you've got like a nice little clever initiative system. And then another bit that I really liked down here is the way that death works. So this is it's very similar in many ways to, I guess, like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, where when you're taking HP damage, it's not really causing serious wounds, but when you run out of HP, you're going to take something like a critical wound, basically. And there's a chance that you'll be put out of action. So a little bit of common thread with Into the Odd and Electric Bastion on there, but you're basically always taking one of these wounds if you take damage below a certain amount of HP, below 0 HP rather. And some of these are brutal. So you've just got like face melted. And yet blood tainted, you can't regain HP. And I like these a lot because there's not too many that, like, you got leg mangled, which reduces your speed, but it's not like a death spiral. It's more like interesting, exciting narrative flourishes, which is what I tried to do with the scar table. Because I don't like these systems where you just take so many wounds that you end up like ineffective. But you might end up with your face burned off, coughing up blood, but you're still functioning. You got a system for duels, which is like this cool kind of weird mini game, which is quite a nice, fun little thing to have. And you've even got like a warband combat and like a full-on mass combat system, and a chase system. And again, these are things that you would just bust out as you need them for like little spotlight moments, I guess. That's how I would use them anyway. And yeah, more cool stuff. Now, downtime. There is a lot going on in here, so settle in. So remember earlier I said about how when you roll on these, like, well, let's go back to them. So it's the core procedure. So when you roll on these sort of encounter rolls for these like overloaded encounter dice, you might get something like a complication or a trend. And yeah, you could just freeform that, but then there are tables for that. So this complication means it could be an ally of the company cuts ties with you, or a series of murders begins, or a major figure was assassinated. Now, if it were me, perhaps I'm a glutton for punishment and wanting to make more tables, I would use this as like a template and have different complications for like different regions of the world, or different, certainly for different settings, but like just tweak it a little bit so that each kind of city or area that you're in feels a little bit different. And then same with trends. So a religious event such as a miracle occurs, or a new faction emerges. You could mix this up. And yeah, it's just cool that you've got this kind of, I keep saying procedure, but there's so much sort of procedural generation going on. It's really cool. World. Rivals, I'm a big fan. There's actually a procedure for it, whereas I just said, make a rival, off you go. It's one of the, I wouldn't say it's a weak part of Electric Bastion Land, but it's definitely one of the more off you go, work it out parts of Electric Bastion Land, because I put it in there and then I kind of do use it myself sometimes, but a lot of the time I don't, but I thought I'll leave that in there. So it's a bit of a contentious thing, but here it's actually fleshed out. So I'm glad somebody did their homework on it. Threats are kind of like your growing, impending dooms. A little bit like sort of Apocalypse World thing with their fronts that they have. It reminds me a little bit of that, which I actually really like. Like I love that kind of swelling thing in the background, and I tend to use it I tend to do it very informally myself, with just like marking something off as like a little countdown to when something bad's going to happen. But here it's a bit more of a system. And you've got like a faction turn system if you want to have factions interacting with each other. Then you've got downtime actions that you can do, which, speaking of Apocalypse World, basically uses the Apocalypse World system here. I think that's fair to say. And I think that's cool. Like, it fits because it's a very flexible little mechanic that gives you a kind of results that you can generally apply to most situations where you've got like success, partial success, fail. So most things that you could be doing in downtime, you can kind of slap it onto here pretty easily. Oh, I haven't done any criticism in a while. I've not seen anything that I really didn't like. I'm going to look out for something bad. I'm going to try and be a critic. But I'm joking, obviously, because with these read-throughs, what I don't want to do is I don't want to give the impression this is me doing a review, because I'm not a reviewer. I don't think I've ever written a review on my blog in all of 12 years or whatever it's been. And I'm much more interested in like looking at the bits that I like. And if I do mention something that I don't like, that isn't me doing a review. That's me saying like, oh, this is just a thing that I happen to not like, because I'm a big believer that you should be open about your tastes, and you should try and work out what works for you in games. And if I don't like something, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means, oh, that I probably wouldn't use that. So I think I would always encourage people to like be open and say, this kind of rule doesn't quite work for me. But it's not a review. I'm looking through this so that we can all kind of get an idea what it's like and see what we can all learn from it. Because, you know, that's half the reason I buy other people's games. I'm not going to run other people's games. Who's got time for that? Just make your own. So I'm looking for things I can steal. So yeah, we have this, and then it's fleshed out into sort of more specific actions for your downtime. So things like shopping and socializing. Funerals are a big deal. Oh, and I didn't mention the way that you gain XP is by wasting money. So it's that kind of carousing system, I guess. But you can also waste money for XP, and it's kind of tied to different ability scores, which is cool. So your smart character, they'll want to waste more money doing sophistry, obsessive and trivial research, and supreme pretension. Sounds like a good day out to me. Then for well, we'll get to the settlement shortly, because there's some interesting stuff here how it works. And you've got a kind of a carousing table, which is always fun to have. Lifestyle system, rather than worrying about buying individual clothes and meals. That's always handy. Training uses a kind of Apocalypse World style system again. I'm speeding through because I want to get to the... Well, I do like that there's a system for animal training, because that feels very much... So one of the vibes that I get from this document, and I'm not sure how true this is, hopefully Ava will be able to confirm or deny this in the comments if Ava is still here. And the vibe that I get from this game is it feels like a game that started with that little core of rules, and it felt like everything else was added out of something that happened during a game. And I'm sure some things were just added in because, you know, they're rules that were picked up from elsewhere. But it feels like this rule is here because a player said... The player ended up with a dog, and they're like, well, is there any way we can go and train our dog to be like a guard dog? So there is a system in here. And it all gets that kind of vibe where it feels like it could be like a ring binder of rules that kind of emerge through play. Which I like a lot. Again, it's that kind of thinking more about logistics than strategy. It's like it's stuff that's going to matter at the table rather than trying to make some really, really, really clever, mathematically clever mechanic. Where are we? Crafting, again, uses a similar kind of system, basically. All of these downtime things are actually quite unified, which I quite like. Alchemy items you can make. And this is where I start to get the vibe of like this. Because for all that this book is like a mess, it's kind of hard to not get inspired by bits of it. And then you read the next bit and it's something awful. It's such a mixed bag. But there are little sections in here that sort of get you excited and make you think, oh, this is something I hadn't really thought about. And then you read the next page and there's something that sounds very much like it was written in 1970s or 80s, whenever this one was released. So, where are we? Because there's the bit that I really like. I think it's in mundane. Legal trials, investigations, proclamations. If an errant wishes to spread information of some sort, whether it be disseminating false rumours or championing their glorious deeds, it can be handled by making a proclamation. 2 components must be specified. So this is like making a PR, a press release, like a big public statement, which is cool. I've never seen a rule for that. I've never seen a rule for like getting your tweet to go viral, essentially. I'm looking for... I've missed a section that I saw earlier and I really liked, so apologies that I'm kind of glossing over a few here. Power? I'm glossing over some cool stuff here. I mean, just go and read it. Like, I mean, I know that this kind of removes the need for this read through, but maybe it's in world. What I'm looking for is maybe it's in items, prices. Here we economy. Right. Yeah, I can see. I can see Ava is like one step ahead of me. So yes, I was looking for this section. So there are 5 tiers of different types of settlement. Yep, okay, pretty standard. Items have a rarity, and so if you're in a tier 3 town, then you can get items up to tier 3, generally no problem. So let's go to our items. So a rarity 3 item. A rarity 3 item might be some greaves, or a brigadine, or let's get something more interesting. Antitoxin. Yeah, that's something you're really going to want when you want it. So if you're like, I need some antitoxin, then if you can go to a town, they probably got it. But you can try and get it from somewhere smaller. So say you're in a village and you need some antitoxin, and they're like, oh, antitoxin, I don't know. Don't you know we're only a tier 2 town? You know, there's a chance that it's available, and there's a chance that it's not. But the bit that I really liked in here is, if it's unavailable for whatever reason, it may potentially still be bought, sold, or hired, though it will take time, effort, or money on the part of the errants. Items will likely have to be commissioned, bartered, or haggled for, and skilled retainers specifically sought after. So maybe if you are in this village and you are looking for antitoxin and you fail the roll, it's boring to just say, oh yeah, you go to the shop and they say we haven't got any antitoxin, you'll have to travel to the town. And it's like, well, great, okay, so that's game over then, I guess. But instead, it kind of encourages you to be a bit more creative, and it's a little bit of kind of like fail forward, I guess, where you failed the roll, but it's not a dead end. So instead you say, well, I don't have any antitoxin, but there's this old guy that lives in the woods and hangs out with snakes, and I'm pretty sure he'll be able to get you some. But you're going to have to go and seek him out in the woods. And isn't that more interesting than saying, no, you can't buy the antitoxin because it's too rare for this place? Or even in like a city, because you could still fail the roll for something relatively mundane in the city, and it could be that they are sold out of, let's look at the list, let's find some rarity 5 items. They're sold out of cathedrals. No, we're not necessarily thinking that. Rarity 5 is, you know, the clue's in the name, but it is quite rare. Let's take a 4 item, rarity 4, because there are some 5s in here, but let's say you're looking for an occult book, and it's rarity 4, and you go to your tier 4 settlement, which is a city, and you're looking for an occult book, and they don't have any at the library. Think why that is. So has somebody checked out all of the occult books? Is there just one place that sells it, and it's like a private members club, and you have to be invited into there? It's such a small little thing, that rule, and I hope I'm not misreading it, but it just adds a lot. And then you've got retainers, who are your kind of hirelings, and there's quite a nice little system around those as well. And again, it's a similar sort of thing where they might not be available, but you can make it a bit more interesting if they're not available. So I think we've covered a good amount of it. I'm not going to try and necessarily hit every single note. I did say that we had some, as well as the failed professions, there's going to be some keepsakes, which are just nice little extra items. And then we've got a few little previews of the art. So the book is like being made right now, as far as I'm aware. So we've got some artwork, which looks pretty cool. But I'm very excited to see the finished product. And as I said, you can pre-order this. I believe it'll be the start of next year, like Q1 2022 is going to be when this is like being sent out. But yeah, it looks pretty cool. So I'm giving it it's not a review, but I'm giving it my thumbs up. Even if you're not interested in running this, I think there's going to be a lot of cool stuff in there, and so much of it is available online at this webpage that I think it's worth checking out, even if you decide not to buy it. Thank you everybody for watching. The other bit of news that I have, which I will be doing a bit more of a full announcement on, at the start of next week or the end of this week is, first of all, thank you to all my Patreon supporters who make these videos possible. You can go to patreon.com/bastionland to see what's going on there. But there are going to be some big changes going on. I am following in the wake of No Pun Included, who do board game videos, and they made a big change to their Patreon that really resonated with me, because my understanding is people who support me on Patreon, it seems like they were doing it mainly because they enjoy the content that I put out. Crazy, I know. But it was more a case of that, and then the sort of extra behind the scenes stuff that you get for supporting at the higher tier levels was more of a side effect, and people were generally backing at the level that they could afford to support at. And it felt wrong that people who had maybe less disposable income or weren't in a position to support me on Patreon were not able to get that content. So what I will be doing from next week is the tiers pricing on the Patreon will be staying the same. So if you are a patron, you don't need to do anything. But all patrons will be eligible for all rewards from all tiers. And the only difference between the 3 tiers will be a little cosmetic thing that you get if you're in the Discord server, and you get a different title. Because, like I say, I want it to be fair, and I didn't want, if somebody can only afford to support at the lowest tier, I don't want them to be missing out on stuff just because the person at the top tier has more disposable income. Because it feels like they were all they all wanted to do the same thing, and they all wanted to just support as much as they could. So that will be changing from the start of next week. There'll be a proper announcement going up. And the other thing is that the content that I am putting behind the scenes on, or rather the weekly Bastionland editorial that I'm posting on the Patreon, I'm going to start releasing that a couple of weeks later on my blog as just a normal blog post. Because, again, if you can't support me on Patreon, and you haven't got the disposable income, I don't want you to miss out on. It's a really small thing, but I don't want you to be missing out on that. So that is a little bit of bookkeeping at the end. As always, you can find out more about what's going on with everything to do with Bastionland at bastionland.com. And for the first time ever, I've actually kind of hit the hour almost perfectly. And remember, check out Errant RPG. And until next time, goodbye for now.